Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Working with Perpetrators annual conference. My name is Inji Aranu, and I'm very excited to be moderating this very important and relevant two-day conference. The overarching topic, as you are all aware, is domestic violence, specifically migration and barriers to perpetrator work, developing pathways to engagement. Our hosts, the European Network for the Work with Perpetrators of Domestic Violence, unites 63 members from 32 different countries. They're a network for organisations working with perpetrators, working with victims, and doing research on domestic violence. They have been founded to address violence in close relationships as a gender-based phenomenon. They foster gender equality and improve the safety of those at risk from violence. This conference focus is located firmly within the context of cultural sensitivity and anti-racist practice when working with perpetrators from diverse backgrounds, whether that be religious, race, or any other differentiating minority feature. Just to tell you and share a little bit about myself, I am a social worker, a UK London-based social worker. I qualified in 2003 and have enjoyed, or mostly enjoyed, a very wide-ranging London-based professional career, working in services such as the child protection area, working with children and young people who are looked after in care, and the very tense environment of court work. I have held managerial positions for over 10 years, and currently my professional portfolio includes domestic violence and abuse. I oversee a service that delivers programs for perpetrators of violence, their female partners or their ex-partners, and of course their children. Now, before I move on to introducing our first keynote speaker, a little bit of housekeeping. I think in order for us to get the most out of the day, I encourage you to remain fully engaged. Let's challenge ourselves to remain connected with the content of the day, as we all have busy schedules, but we have committed time out to be here. Let's be present in the moment. Let's not seek to multitask through, for example, reading emails or taking work calls. Please feel free to use the chat to enter a thumbs up or other symbol or word to show your agreement here. During the course of the day, if you experience technical issues, please first try to refresh your browser. If problems persist, please send an email to hello@fundraisingeverywhere.com. Workshops a little later will take place via Zoom, and you should have received a link via email. I now invite Alessandra Pauncz, the Executive Director. Let's give her a warm welcome. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to all. I'm so incredibly grateful and proud of being here today, opening this conference and enjoying with all of you the monumental work of so many. I would like to thank the working group and the amazing team at WWP that never ceases to amaze me with their passion and outstanding professional ability. This conference faces probably one of the most complex and challenging topics we have ever addressed. You will soon hear about the processes that I hope will help us all actively participate, engage, and appreciate the content of this conference. I wish to also draw your attention to the surveys, recommendations, webinars that have led up and prepared the road over the course of the past years to this conference. You will find the links in the messages but also you will receive a follow-up email with all of the activity and the links. I would like to personally thank Antonia, Lorna, David, Mahmoud, Anna, and the team behind the scenes that makes everything possible, Mirko and Janet, the Fomen team, Dimitra and Dalia, and the support, of course, of Sandra and Berta. I'm especially grateful because the last 2 years have been really hard. The first year of the pandemic, we were propelled by the fuel of the emergency, and we responded trying to create as many resources as possible to support our members in perpetrator work. This helped really expand our reach and impact, but has also created an increased workload. As most of you know, we are in the last year of the operational grant, so we also decided to invest a lot of energy in project development, just in case. The increased work has been exhausting, especially because we have to do all this without human contact. It seems like things should be shifting. We have been back in the office in Berlin for the first time in a year, so we are optimistic. But I don't want to underestimate the hardship that we have been through, the resilience we have shared, and the loving support this amazing team at WWP has nourished. Thank you all for this. But my thoughts are also to all the hardships many of our members are facing. Personal loss, isolation, constant uncertainty have made a challenging experience like working with Perpetrator and managing a center even harder. In these 2 days, I hope we will have a chance to reconnect and to reflect on migration and barriers to perpetrator work and focus on developing pathways to change. As always in our line of work, the first step is self-reflection, observing our diversity or lack thereof, our specialized services for migrants or lack thereof, our organizational and social anti-racist practices or lack thereof. As the daughter of an expat mother and asylum-seeking father, I know the hardships of integration, the fear of borders, and the intergenerational sense of identity confusion and non-belonging. But I have also experienced the strength, the resilience, the dreams, and the striving for freedom and something better that comes with migration. I am really looking forward to the next 2 days and in learning from and with you, and I would like to introduce the following speaker that will tell us more about the process of setting up this conference. Lorna Cannon is our new project communication manager and member of the planning committee that has joined us at the beginning of the year. Although she has been with us only for a few months, she has been an amazing addition to our team and a support in organizing the conference. Please welcome Lorna. Lorna, the floor is yours.
Good morning. We are really looking forward to the next couple of days, and we wanted to begin today by talking about the process of organizing a conference addressing delicate topics. The first question to address is, why was this topic chosen for our annual conference? According to the United Nations in 2020, 281 million people worldwide were living outside of their country of origin, of whom around 85 million live as migrants in Europe. At the same time, around 736 million women globally have been subjected to gender-based violence. It is therefore inevitable that at some point, gender-based violence and migration will intersect, creating new layers of complexity on the path towards a safer and more equitable world. It was with this in mind that WWP decided to dedicate this year's annual conference to the topic of perpetrator work and migration. Practitioners in the field of perpetrator work need to understand how to work with people who use violence who have a migration background. How do we conduct effective perpetrator work when cultural and/or linguistic differences present themselves? How do we ensure fair treatment and victim safety when working with people who perhaps have little understanding of the judicial or social care systems in their host countries? How do we deliver sensitive programs when dealing with people who have been traumatized by the reason for their migration, by the journey that they were potentially forced to make, and by the structural violence that they face on arrival? How do we uphold anti-racist and culturally sensitive practice in all our interventions? The answers to these questions are not only important for perpetrator work practitioners, they are crucial in our increasingly globalized world, where more people are forced on the move due to economic, humanitarian, and environmental reasons. Putting this conference together has been a complicated process. When discussing perpetrator work, we are already talking about a controversial topic. Talking about this kind of work in a migration context requires careful planning in order to ensure that our message comes across in the right way. It was back in March of this year, when we were still in the throes of pandemic-induced lockdowns in Europe, that the annual conference committee, led by WWP's membership manager, Antonio Montanas, including myself, David Moran of Stirling University, and Mahmoud Rehawi, part of WWP's communications team, sat down via video call to begin discussing how to take this difficult topic and turn it into a productive, compelling, and above all, anti-racist and culturally sensitive conference. Our early video calls during this process consisted of mainly virtually banging our heads together and coming up short. We first asked ourselves who we were talking about when discussing migrants. In fact, there is no universally accepted definition of migration or migrant, and so the word itself does not suggest one demographic, although in recent years it has become synonymous with those fleeing to Europe seeking asylum. It is important at the beginning of this conference to emphasize that when we say migrant, we mean someone who has, for whatever reason, moved from their native country to another country. This could mean asylum seekers, refugees, third country nationals, European Union nationals residing outside of their native countries, but still within the European Union. Working with anyone who has migrated or has a migration background requires a certain need for adjusted communication, understanding, and sensitivity. And this, of course, is heightened when people belong to ethnic or religious minorities. That is why it was important for us to include a session that showcases work with specific cultural communities, and of course to include workshops on cultural sensitivity and anti-racism. We hope that the final conference program reflects our painstaking work to exhibit important experience in the field, as well as listening to those with lived experience of the topics we will be discussing. It was when we started to reach out to people about delivering workshops and presentations that we realized how limited our contacts were regarding people working with migrant communities, and indeed people with migrant backgrounds themselves. This was a time of real self-reflection for us as a network. Both our team and our members are overwhelmingly white European nationals. The diversity we aim to speak about at this conference barely existed in our own work, and this has been a real learning curve for us. After organizing this conference, we will certainly think much more carefully about diversifying our own network and including voices of minorities in our work going forward, including focusing on this topic during our annual campaign in November. One regret we have about our conference program is that we were not able to find someone to talk about the topic of honor-based violence, something that we felt was a relevant aspect within the context of our annual conference theme. Going forward, we hope to learn more about this issue and expand our network to people working on the topic. This conference includes a diverse audience as well as discussion about people from diverse backgrounds. For this reason, we anticipate that both participants and presenters at this conference will have diverse opinions and experiences. At WWP, we support free speech and we encourage healthy discussion. It is also important for us that any disagreements or debates are handled in a respectful manner and that no one is subjected to racism, xenophobia, or any form of hate speech during this conference. With this in mind, I invite you all to enter the next 2 days of the conference with an open mind, ready to learn and be part of building pathways to change as perpetrator workers, victim support workers, and researchers working within diverse communities.
Thank you so much, Lorna, for those powerful words of welcome and actually context. I'd now like to welcome Dr. Marceline Naudi of GREVIO. If you have any questions, please post your questions in the chat. Welcome, Dr. Naudi.
Hello, and thank you very much for having invited me to give this talk. I'm going to talk about GREVIO and gender-based violence, migration, work with perpetrators. So I'm going to start by telling you very briefly about GREVIO, what we do, etc. And of course, also briefly about the Istanbul Convention. And then I will move on to gender-based violence, migration, perpetrators, all in 20 minutes. Let's see how it goes. So to start with, as you just heard, I am a member of GREVIO, and GREVIO is the independent expert body responsible for monitoring the implementation of the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, a long title, which is known as the Istanbul Convention. Countries that have ratified the convention are subject to monitoring of their implementation. So it's not just let's sign this and then whoopsie daisy, there we are, everything's fine. If they have ratified, then they are subject to monitoring of their implementation of the convention. And that's what we, GREVIO, do. So to date, we have 34 countries that have signed and ratified. We have 11 that have signed but not yet ratified. So they have signed their intention to ratify, but they have not actually moved to the ratification part. And we have 2 countries within the Council of Europe who have not signed at all. And one, as I'm sure you have all heard, has withdrawn, which was an unprecedented event. So the GREVIO and its membership is governed by Article 66 of the Convention itself, which states how many members, when, how, etc. So it says that GREVIO shall have between 10 after the 10th country ratification and 15 after the 25th ratification members. So it shall have between 10 and 15 members, depending on the number of countries that have ratified. And of course, the GREVIO members must all be nationals of the states parties to the convention. That is, the countries that have actually ratified the convention. So the first 10 members of GREVIO were elected by the Committee of the Parties, and the Committee of the Parties is a committee that's made up of representatives of those countries that ratified the convention. So the first 10 members were elected at the first meeting of the Committee of the Parties in May 2015 for a period of 4 years, which was renewable once. As you can see, I am still here, so I was renewed, I was re-elected. A further 5 were elected in May 2018, and at the end of the first 4-year term in 2019, 6 of the original members were re-elected, including me. And a further 4 new members were elected to GREVIO. We had our first meeting way back in September 2015 in Strasbourg. In March 2016, we adopted a questionnaire, which we are using as the baseline for the monitoring. And we launched our first evaluation procedure shortly after that. So far, we've monitored and published baseline evaluation reports in respect of 18 countries, which I won't list, but I have them if you want to know who they are. Poland is the last one. It's hot off the press, just issued a few days ago, published a few days ago. These evaluations are called baseline evaluation reports because they consist in a comprehensive analysis of the country's level of compliance with the convention. So it is setting out their baseline. We have also published 2 activity reports, the first covering the first 4 years of our existence and the second covering a year and a half up to the end of 2020, and we will now be publishing them annually. We're working on a general recommendation, which is something else that we're allowed to do. I would say that there are certain things we are allowed to do because they form part of our remit, and others that we are not allowed to do, even though we would greatly wish to, because they do not form part of our remit. But we are working on a general recommendation on digital violence against women and the ways that the Istanbul Convention covers digital violence. And hopefully that's due to be published very soon. And at any point, of course, we have several evaluations on the go at different stages of the overall procedure. So that was GREVIO, and now just very briefly about the actual convention. So, as you know, the Istanbul Convention is about preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. It stems from the recognition that violence against women is a violation of women's human rights, and that, as such, it should not be acceptable in any of the Council of Europe member states. Indeed, anywhere, I would say, but since it is a Council of Europe convention, then obviously it focuses on that. It addresses all forms of violence against women and domestic violence. And by violence against women, what is meant is violence that is directed against women because they are women and or that affects women disproportionately. It also addresses domestic violence, and it encourages us to apply the provisions of the Convention to all victims of domestic violence, whether they are women or men or other, but whilst also recognizing that domestic violence is disproportionately directed against women and girls. They are what are known as the 4 Ps of the Convention. We're not talking about the peas that come with carrots, of course. The first one is preventing violence, so prevention. The second one is protecting its victims, and prosecuting the perpetrators, together with the requirement to coordinate these measures through comprehensive policies. So that's prevention, protection, prosecution, and integrated comprehensive policies. And at heart, I have always said, and I truly believe, at heart, it is a renewed call for gender equality between women and men. The underlying message of the Convention is that every single form of gender-based violence against women must be responded to in a swift and professional manner that puts the rights and needs of victims, their safety, and their empowerment at its center. So what it does is it aims at equipping countries that have ratified with necessary tools and solutions. It offers guidelines on how to develop effective integrated policies and laws to prevent the violence, to protect the victims and their children, and to offer them means of legal redress, and to hold perpetrators to account. It ensures that responses to violence address all forms and manifestations of violence against women and domestic violence. It aims also at guaranteeing that no victim is left without protection, including, in particular, more vulnerable victims and victims at risk of additional discrimination on account of such factors as ethnic origin, sexual orientation, disability, among several others. More about that later. The first legally binding instrument dealing with violence against women and domestic violence in Europe is this, and it is one of the most advanced treaties in this field. It offers a blueprint for any country, including countries outside Europe. Indeed, we have had expressions of interest from countries outside, such as, for example, Tunisia, who wish to step up their efforts to prevent and combat such violence. And its principal objective, I will state again, is to combat violence against women and domestic violence, to make this a legal obligation and a political priority, by recognizing that violence against women and domestic violence are unacceptable. And allow me to say once more that at heart, it is a renewed call for equality between women and men. Our society still treats us differently, as women, as men. So the impact of everything is experienced differently. The effects are different, and therefore, until such time that we have truly achieved equality, the measures, actions, policies, legislation must be understood and devised through a gendered lens. And this is very, very important. Article 4 of the Convention is about non-discrimination, and it says that all of the provisions, the implementation of all of the provisions should be secured without discrimination on any grounds, such as, and I will read out the list in this case, such as sex, gender, race, color, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, association with a national minority, property, birth, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, state of health, disability, marital status, migrant or refugee status, or other status. So the convention covers women, girls from any background, regardless of their age, their race, etc. The convention recognizes that there are groups of women and girls that are often at greater risk of experiencing violence, and that states, countries need to ensure that their specific needs are also taken into account. And of course, the convention recognizes that domestic violence affects women disproportionately. I'm now going to move on to the perpetrator programs. So Article 16 of the Convention is about preventive intervention and treatment programs. And it requires countries to set up or support programs that prevent perpetrators of domestic violence and of sexual violence from reoffending and support them in changing violent behavioral patterns, which is, of course, what most of you here do. It is important that these programs make the safety of victims, the support for victims, and very importantly, the human rights of victims, their primary concern. These programs have to work in close coordination with specialist support services for survivors, for victims. And in our monitoring, we find that this is not always, for example, the case. We have an example, for example, in Denmark, where various shelters raised concerns over the lack of communication about the perpetrator's progress or attendance rates, and that they felt that this undermined their efforts at ensuring the safety of their clients, the survivors, the victims. So, as GREVIO, during our evaluation procedures, we have paid great attention to the setting up and the rolling out of perpetrator programs for domestic violence, both within and outside prisons or custodial settings. For example, the baseline evaluation reports on Albania, Andorra, Austria, Serbia, Spain, and Sweden, among others, contain detailed information in this regard, and specific observations and findings on programs for perpetrators of sexual violence were made by GREVIO in its baseline evaluation reports on Albania, Andorra, France, Spain, and Turkey. So these baseline evaluation reports are, of course, in the public domain and can be accessed through the Council of Europe website. The baseline reports generally give praise where praise is due, but also point out areas where improvements could be made. So in Italy, Relive, a national network that implements perpetrator programs, has developed consolidated guidelines for perpetrator programs, and it supports newly established programs to reach baseline standards through practice exchange and training. And that is good. That is one of the areas that we praise, where praise is due. However, GREVIO has highlighted that not all publicly funded perpetrator programs apply this approach. Andorra, as another example of good practice, introduced a program to promote non-violent relationships as an essential aspect of an integrated response to violence against women. And this program is also aimed at boys who reproduce violent patterns of behavior to which they were exposed or to which they were direct victims. So, also good. However, again, GREVIO has had to call on authorities to increase generally the number of available programs for perpetrators of domestic violence in the baseline reports of several countries because of the limited number on offer. as well as to increase the levels of attendance of perpetrator programs for domestic violence, whether voluntary or court-ordered. And then there is the issue of perpetrator programs for perpetrators of domestic violence that strongly focus on medical treatment for substance abuse or mental health issues. Whilst, of course, some perpetrators might also have mental health problems and they need medical treatment, we know that the majority of violent men are not in need of psychiatric help. So we called for those countries to move away from perpetrator programs based exclusively on medical treatment, both for mental health problems and and substance abuse, and to set up mandatory psychosocial treatment programs as well. We have asked in various countries that the authorities ensure that the programs for perpetrators of domestic violence and sexual violence incorporate a gendered approach and the deconstruction of sexist stereotypes. And we have also noted the need for scientific research and evaluation of the short and long-term impact of perpetrator programs in order to assess whether perpetrator programs actually serve their preventive purpose. Some countries we have found use a family mediation approach, and this places a great emphasis on keeping families together and mediation in the resolution of conflicts. And we are concerned that this may fail to take account of the unequal relationships between the victim and perpetrators, and indeed it may run counter to protecting victims and prioritizing women's needs and safety. In the Netherlands, for example, these included examples of instances in which women victims of gender-based violence had been expected by support services to accommodate perpetrators' behavior, to change their own behavior, or otherwise risk losing access to the children for non-cooperation. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, this can be seen as disempowering and indeed re-victimizing. There is also a tendency to view domestic violence as mutual violence, considering both parties as perpetrators and not taking into account the context and the history of violence and a primary aggressor analysis. So one of the areas that the Convention emphasizes strongly is that of training, or indeed lack thereof. Training on violence against women, including on a gendered understanding of such violence, on entrenched stereotypes and patriarchal attitudes. Such attitudes lead to inaction because individual officials minimize the violence and seek justification either in the victim's behavior, as in she provoked him or whatever, what did she expect, or indeed that of the perpetrator. Linked to the lack of a gendered understanding of violence against women is the phenomenon of dual reporting, which was observed by GREVIO in its baseline evaluation reports on Malta, which is where I am from, Montenegro, and Serbia. GREVIO noted that victims were frequently charged with committing a crime because the perpetrator concurrently filed a complaint for insults or other trivial offences which were seen as having equal value, dissuading many victims from reporting domestic violence. Intimidation and secondary victimization can occur not only at the hands of perpetrators, but also when criminal justice procedures are not based on a gendered understanding of violence. I'm going to move on. I have to sadly let you know that I did not actually note the time when I started, so I don't know how far I am into my talk. So I hope I don't go over by too much. So I'm going to move on to Articles 59 to 61, Chapter 7 of the Convention, which is on migration and asylum. So Article 59, 5 minutes remaining. Okay, thank you. I'll try to do this as quickly as possible. Article 59 is on resident status, and it contains a number of subsections addressing different problems faced by migrant women, victims of gender-based violence. Among others, these provisions seek to reduce women's dependence on the perpetrator by offering access to an autonomous residence permit. So this includes a requirement that women who have entered the country through family reunification rules and who are victims, of course, of violence against women or domestic violence are given access to an autonomous residence permit. It requires states to protect from expulsion migrant women who are dependent upon a family reunification visa and whose abusive spouse partner is facing expulsion. And it provides for access to a renewable residence permit to migrant women based on either their personal situation or their cooperation with authorities in reporting or prosecuting a criminal offense. And then there's another element here that asks states to ensure that migrant women who lose their residence status in a state as a result of being taken abroad for purposes of forced marriage can be allowed to regain their status. Unfortunately, countries can ask for reservations in relation to parts of Article 59, and some do. So some countries say, we ratify the convention, but we will not do so in relation to these elements of Article 59. Most countries, as it is or was, most countries require spouses or partners to remain married or in a relationship for a given period of time before they can be granted an autonomous residence permit. Therefore, fear of deportation or loss of residence status is often used by perpetrators to prevent victims of violence against women and domestic violence from seeking help from the authorities or from even separating from the perpetrator. As a result, many victims whose residence status is dependent on that of their perpetrator will stay in violent relationship. However, this is no longer the case if the convention is implemented. And this is the case in some countries, but not in others. I am quickly scrolling through my notes here to see what to leave out and what to actually GREVIO in some cases has had to point out to the authorities to make sure that all the needed measures which are being requested in order for them to, in order for victims to apply for these measures, to remove excessively high evidential barriers. I'm sorry about this constant tinkling. GREVIO has also called on these countries to take into consideration isolation and language barriers experienced by migrant women and their dependency on their abuser when they are setting conditions for this article to be implemented. We know that there is lack of awareness amongst migrant women of their rights, and therefore the need for countries to take proactive steps to promote awareness. And we have a good example of this in Portugal. Another issue is the monitoring of the implementation of relevant legislation and policies through the collection of disaggregated data, as required by Article 11 of the Istanbul Convention. And again, whilst there are some good examples of this, most unfortunately do not quite make the grade. And this is important in order to measure the efficacy of measures implemented to protect migrant women. Again, here we find inadequate awareness, inadequate training, and inadequate sensitivity of frontline staff. And this is a common feature in a number of GREVIO's baseline evaluation reports. And as I'm sure you acknowledge, this causes all sorts of barrier. And also, in contrary to the non-discrimination clause in Article 4 of the Convention, a number of parties, I have a list, have implemented measures that either expressly or indirectly exclude certain groups of migrant women from accessing an autonomous residence permit. Right. Article 60 is on gender-based asylum, and it requires parties to the Convention to recognize gender-based violence against women as a form of persecution within the meaning of Article 1A2 of the 1951 Convention relating to status of refugees. The objective is to ensure a gendered approach to the consideration of how and why women and girls experience persecution. I'm going to skip through the rest of Article 60 and just mention Article 61 on non-refoulement. So victims of violence against women who are in need of protection, regardless of their status or residence, shall not be returned under any circumstance to any country where their life would be at risk or where they might be subjected to torture or inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. So overall, the Convention asks for a change in mindsets. Most of the issues are related to the lack of a gender perspective, to traditional patriarchal values still weighing in. And these include not only gender, but also other grounds of discrimination, including ethnic origin, religion, etc. Lack of equality, and in places, lack of political commitment to create the change that is needed. We have various ongoing challenges in Europe, some of which I have mentioned, but we also have worrying signals which have emerged about attempts to backtrack on reforms and measures. This includes attacks on women's human rights, shrinking resources for women's NGOs and support structures, coordinated movements under the anti-gender ideology flag have opposed progress on gender equality and women's human rights, as well as LGBTIQ+ rights, on the basis of misconceptions and false narratives. The Istanbul Convention has been particularly targeted by such attacks, which have delayed ratification in some member states and, of course, led to the unprecedented withdrawal of one state party to the convention. This is not a blip. This will not go away. It is a concerted effort, and we must be ready and prepared to fight the fight wherever it is raised. I'll stop there. I apologize for having gone over, and I look forward to your questions.
Sorry, I was muted. That's a term that we've heard a lot over the period of COVID. So, Dr. Naudi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your very, very informative presentation. It's quite clear that GREVIO is leading the way in terms of the work that it's doing. I really liked the acronym, the P's, which I understand is preventing, protecting, prosecution and policy. I made a particular note there. So thank you. I will go through questions now. There are a few questions. So firstly, Doctor, a question from Anna. How can organisations, e.g. perpetrator programmes, become part of the GREVIO evaluation process?
Okay, well, if the perpetrator program is an NGO, then GREVIO, so the GREVIO procedure is that it is triggered by GREVIO sending notification to the authorities and the questionnaire, which is again online, it's publicly available online, and asking them to send us the information, the authorities, the state authorities, asking them to send us information by a certain date. At the same time, NGOs are normally also contacted and encouraged. So the state has to send us a report. The NGOs are encouraged. We appreciate and we welcome what are sometimes known as shadow reports from NGOs. So if there is a perpetrator program which is an NGO, then they can indeed send us in a report when their country is being evaluated. If they are part of the state services, then they have to work their way through their state institution to make sure that the information that is required, and we do request information on perpetrator programs, that the information that is being requested, that they can contribute to that information. Does that answer the question?
I believe so. Thank you. We have a further question from our Executive Director, Alessandra. How is the push for gender neutral policies, conditioning policies, and how is that addressed in the Istanbul Convention?
Well, indeed, one of the things that I left out was, one of the ongoing challenges in Europe is precisely male-oriented or gender-neutral laws not taking into full account the realities of women. And this is, again, we have, as GREVIO, we have pointed this out in a number of evaluation reports included in the either Denmark or Netherlands. I'm sorry if there are any Danish or Dutch people present. I can't remember which one. Where I think it was Denmark actually. Where this had got to the stage where they, rather than they weren't even identifying perpetrators or victims, survivors, but they were just calling them involved parties, so that they were actually on the same level. So yes, it is affecting wherever we see it, wherever it is brought to our attention during an evaluation. We tackle it.
Thank you. A further question from Sandra. Thank you for your question, Sandra. Could you please say more about good practices in ensuring safety of women in the context of migration?
Yes. Give me a minute to find it. I didn't give the example of Bari in Italy, did I? I didn't, did I? I left that out, I think. So there was a very good example in Bari in Italy, although there was differences in the different provinces in Italy. But there was a good example in Bari, which I am striving to find. Well, okay, let's go for Sweden. No, Bari. Immigration officers have received substantive training on gender issues in asylum claims and how to ensure a gender-sensitive procedure. Interpreters have received training on gender sensitivity during interviews, and women are interviewed by female staff with the help of female interpreters, with women's express consent being required where interpretation is ensured. Where interpretation is not possible by a woman but by a man, then the woman's express consent is required. And again, for persons identified as vulnerable, then again, further specially trained interpreters are used. One of the issues generally is that there is a lack of women interpreters, but here and a lack of training generally across the board. But here we find a very good example. And in Sweden, have a standard operating procedure to identify particularly vulnerable asylum seekers in the reception facilities in order to make sure that women victims of gender-based violence are offered appropriate accommodation adapted to their individual needs and safety concerns. So those are two good examples that we have in relation to ensuring the safety of migrant women.
Thank you. Another question. We have a question from Alessandra. In your experience of evaluation of the application of the Istanbul Convention, how much information were you supplied about perpetrator programs? Would you say there is a lack of information on how perpetrator programs are delivered?
Well, again, I will just sort of explain a bit more about the procedure. So we send out this sort of questionnaire and we ask the state authorities to send in the information that we require. And we consult with NGOs and we encourage them to similarly submit what we call a shadow report. So what they think that the state is actually doing. When we receive that information from the state, if there are areas that we think have not been properly addressed, so for example, perpetrator programs, we will then get back to them. We then visit the country. We actually carry out a visit in the country. This has been a bit difficult, as you can understand, over the past year and a bit. And we then tackle those specific issues that we feel were not sufficiently, we did not receive sufficient information on. We tackle that specifically during the visit. And during the visit, we also visit, we actually visit programs. And I certainly have visited Perpetrator programs, although my brain is trying to remember where. I think actually, possibly in Sweden. I can't remember exactly. I think it was in Sweden, where we actually visit Perpetrator programs and discuss with the workers there anything that we feel the need to question further or gather further information on. Of course, we don't always visit Perpetrator programs, but sometimes we also do that. So I would say that yes, sometimes there is some information which is missing, not only on Perpetrator programs, I would add, but also in various other sections of the report. We ask specifically about those areas where we think that there is information missing. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't.
Yeah, thank you. Another question from Bertha. Could you share a good example of an evaluation of the impact of Perpetrator programs, including long-term impact?
No, I can't. Sorry. Sorry. No, I don't have. I don't have available a good example of evaluation on the impact of Perpetrator programs. Sorry.
Okay. In the short term, I know Bertha asks for the long-term impact. Is it possible to think around the kind of the immediacy and short term?
No, I can't, because it would be dependent on information which was given to us by various countries. So, and one of the issues we find is that there is a lack of evaluation generally, both in the short and long term. So I don't have one.
Okay. A question from Sandra. What is the impact of the reports and recommendations that the GREVIO is issuing? Are they obligatory for states?
Thank you, Sandra, for that question. So that allows me to explain the rest of the procedure. So we send out the questionnaire, the state sends in a report, some NGOs send in the shadow report, we put all that information together, we visit and we request further information where it is needed. We then come out with our report. Our report is then published and is authorized, so to speak, by the committee of the parties. That is, that committee that holds the representatives of the various states that have ratified the convention. And what they tend to do is they tend to take the ones that we have, the recommendations that we have prioritized. So we have like a system of prioritization, which is, like urge, strongly encourage, or invite, with the urge obviously being the top of that. So they tend to take the urges and also all of the recommendations in the related to the first two chapters, because they are the foundation, if you like, of the convention, and they request from the state concerned that they take action on these issues. After 3 years, which has just come up now, so our first reports were issued 3 years ago. After 3 years, the state has to report to the committee of the parties what actions they have taken in relation to the the recommendations which were issued. So we are now at that stage now. They are obligatory for states, and because the convention is a legally it's a legal convention. It legally obliges states to implement. So they are obliged to follow at least the recommendations which have been prioritized, and they have to report back to the Committee of the Parties. The Committee of the Parties will then assess whether the information which is given to them sufficiently addresses the concerns in the recommendations made, and then action will be taken following that.
Thank you.
Sorry, it was a bit of a long answer there. Sorry about that, Sally.
Thank you, Dr. Naudi. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the information you shared about GREVIO, its articles and all the wonderful work. For me, I particularly was interested in the adolescent to parent or adolescent to other violence following exposure to domestic violence, I guess as a child or young person. I thought that was very interesting. Thank you so much. I'm sure the participants, the audience have enjoyed your presentation and the information that you've had to share. It's been very, very informative. And once again, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak, and thank you for the conference and for raising, shining a light on these issues. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Good morning and welcome. Oh, we also have Isabella Mancini. I hope I've pronounced your name right. I'm sorry, please forgive me if I have not.
It's perfect. Thanks.
That is very, very important in the work that we do. So perfect. And I just want to say a really big thank you to you, Isabella, for joining us at quite short notice. So everyone is very welcome, and let's start. I think can I ask you to just say the organisation that you're connected with, and then we'll move into the questions and discussion.
Well, my organization is Nosotras Onlus. It is an association of migrant women and Italian women. It was born 22 years ago in a total different imaginary of migration in Italy, and when the female migration was totally different from now, and well, a lot of water passed down the bridge in this period, and also the association work in different aims and supporting the rights of women, but also supporting the community and the activity of the community inside the association in an intercultural perspective.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Can I invite Dr. and Imam Zahed to say a few words, please, about the organisation that you're with?
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. Good morning. So my name is Ludovic-Mohamed Zahed. I'm a doctor in anthropology and psychology, and I'm also a theologian and imam, director of the Kalam Institute in Marseille, where we do research, publications, training, and we also welcome refugees in a shelter that we have at the back. We work with different grassroots organizations, locally and internationally, trying to give them tools, academic, theological, or logistical tools for community building.
Thank you. Thank you. Gerhard and Bahia?
Yeah, hello and good morning. Yeah, I'm Gerhard Hafner. I'm a psychologist here in Berlin in an organization Beratung für Männer gegen Gewalt, also Counseling for Men Against Violence in a body of Volkssolidarität, and we project since the 90s and working with men who are violent against women from all backgrounds.
My name is Bahia Hasnaoui. I also work as a psychologist with my colleague and with perpetrators of violence against their partners or ex-partners.
Thank you, and welcome, panel members. So our first question, tell us something about the work you do with people from migrant refugee communities. The second part of the question is, what are the challenges you face? Who would like to start?
Okay. I can start. We are working with men who are violence against their partners or ex-partners, and in Berlin we have people from different backgrounds, cultures, social classes, and that's why also in the team we are 4 colleagues, like 2 men and 2 women from different generations, and as well with different native languages, speaking Arabic, French, Turkish, German, and English. And the counseling we do is usually face-to-face or in groups, but the groups are only in German, and because we don't have the resources for groups in other languages. And we also work in cooperation with services that will support women and children, so that when the partners of the clients who are seeking counseling here go there, we can have feedback from them how the work is going, and how, if there is any if the man, for example, was violent again or not, or how it is working. So that is an important point, that we can get this feedback from them. And my colleague Gerhard Hafner works also with the children. He sees the children of the clients who come here, some of them. And one of the challenges we face is that sometimes some of the men who come here, or many of them, or many of the ones who have who are from migrant communities, they are sent by youth welfare services or by the justice system, and it is usually a condition for them to be able to see their kids again, or to be able to move back again to their homes in case they're still with their partners. So it is a challenge that it is not really an internal motivation that brings them to us in the first place, but it is also a chance, because sometimes it can change in the counseling when they see that how they are acting as fathers is important for their children, and that is even if they want to be good fathers, if there are violence towards their partners, that is not possible. It is not an example for fatherhood or for man to be a man, a real man. That is one challenge we face. Another challenge is like if they have different problems, like, for example, with their residence permits or with racism, we have to send them to the association who deal with this, because if they have, for example, if they are like with a partner who is, and they are not getting any money from, we already had this situation that the person was like having a tolerance permit and had really trouble for months because also of Corona and other things, that he didn't get money. So he was completely dependent from his partner, and it led to many problems, and it is hard to help them in our center, if they don't deal with these other things, and they get a minimum of other things in control. Like
thank you, Bahia. I welcome the experience of our other panel members. Isabella?
Yep. As a association, we have a different kind of structure of apartment, not exactly shelter house, but apartment in cohabitation of women, migrant women mainly, who comes out from paths of gender-based violence or economical difficulties, and we offer accompaniment to the service and support to achieve autonomy by working in a network with the social service of our territories and the other associations that work in the same issue on the ground. We have also 4 different help desks to listen to women and their problem and their needs, to make with them a project for orientation and a plan for training and introduction to the world of work. And we work also with the most active communities, migrant communities in the city of Florence mainly, for mutual and development and support each other. But above all, we are a self-help group that supports each other for personal and collective growth and the affirmation of women's rights. The most important challenge that we are facing in these last 2 years are related to the construction of autonomy paths for the empowerment of the women, especially in the search for home for migrant women. But this is a problem also for the families and also for male. And another big problem that we are trying to fix with the authorities of our city, but also to the government level, is concerned about the renewal of the document of the people, because the time that they need to renew the documents had to be very long, and it's a very big problem to find the way in which we could support people without documents to look for a job, or even if to be inside a process of formal formation and to have a chance to be involved in the future. Mainly this is the work that we are doing in this period.
Thank you. Dr. Imam Zahed?
Yes, thank you. So as I said, Kalem is not a grassroots organization, so we're doing research, publication, training, but more and more we had people coming to us and telling us, this is very good what you're telling us, but we don't have accommodation, shelter, food. We are lacking support in terms of administrative work we have to do as refugees, asylum seekers, and so on. So we started 10 years ago working with grassroots organizations locally and internationally, and we ended up having a shelter in the Little House of the Garden Institute, where we can shelter up to 6 people normally, but during lockdowns it was up to 12. But it was really a specific period where even the training rooms were turned into like kind of a dorm shelter. So there's several organizations here in Marseille working within our network called Houses, the Houses of Inclusion in Marseille, that we created 3 years ago in order to better structure our inter-organizational dynamics. And within this network, they can provide like food, accommodation, health prevention, training, and so on and so forth. Art also, and cultural activities, because we're also part of the Festival de Marseille, that kind of thing. But the main issue, I would say, we were talking about that with the at our networks meeting last Sunday. The main issue in Marseille, I would say, despite everything else in terms of, integration in Europe as a refugee and so on, is accommodation. Because we had like an issue 3 years ago with buildings collapsing because, a lot of corruption and so on. So many people were kicked out of home, even landlords from their own house or apartments, for complete renovation of entire neighborhoods. So migrants, of course, were even more at risk in terms of finding themselves sleeping in streets, at the train station, and so on. So that's the biggest issue we have to face. And of course, the paperwork, especially for English-speaking asylum seekers, is also an issue in France, because the administration here is very finicky, but taking into account stories told in other languages and so on. French classes are done by organizations, grassroots organizations, not by the government, generally speaking. So yeah, I would say that integration, and especially in terms of accommodation, is a big issue. We have also several cases of concrete discrimination within the administration, the OFPA, the National Agency for Refugees. When people, kind of homo-nationalist representation of what a gay should look like. So we had several cases of especially gay men not looking like they think a gay man should look like effeminate and sensitive and whatever they imagine a gay guy should be. So that was also a big issue of making people understand within local administrative authorities or national authorities that there's an issue here in terms of dealing with those identity representations. And a last issue would be also the fact that, I will talk about that later. Yeah, those are the main issues. Yes.
Thank you. It sounds that there's possibly a kind of theme coming through from some of the responses that we've had from you both, Isabella and Dr. Imam Zahed, which is around resources. It seems that resources, I've heard a lot about housing, that's come through as a theme. Moving on to our next question, and I'll read this. How can we do outreach to migrant refugee communities and let them know about our services? How can we do outreach to migrant refugee communities and let them know about our services?
Well, if you want, I could give one first answer about this question. As I told you, our association is an association of interculture, so we don't represent only one migrant community, and we are also strictly connected with the community of Italy, and so this is a strictly connection between all the parts. And the member of our association is women that arrived in Italy 20 or 30 years ago, so a long kind of migration, and they built by themselves and use our association to build a new relationship with the new generation of migration and the second or the third or the fourth generation. So I think that one of the most important thing is to have directly and strictly connection between different community and different age. Of course, the problem of involving new generation is something that is really important to solve and to fix. Is something that we are working on, because we think that the new generation is really important to have a new point of view on the future, and we have to involve them to find a solution of the problem that we are talking about now together. Is through their active participation in the associative world that could be one of the key for the solution of involving the various migrant communities in the participation of community life. And I think that is important to have this kind of intersection between the different level of age, participation, communities, identities, is something that will build in the future the new community that we are living in now.
How do you spread the word? How do you spread the word?
Yeah, as I told you, through the desk that we have on the ground. So usually we have one desk in a different kind of municipality where we are used to work. And from there, we heard the women and we heard the families directly by the meeting each other and using the mediation if we need, or using just the time that we have to heard and analyze the needs that the people have on the ground and try to fix in the place where they are living. So, for example, if we work in Florence, we have our desk there, and we are strictly connected with the municipality, with the authorities, to try to find fix the solution for the needs that the people express on that kind of ground. We have another desk in La Strassigna, we have another desk in another municipality, Empoli, we have another desk in Fucecchio, hearing the people on the ground and try to fix their problem directly on the ground with the connection with the authorities and with the other association that work on the ground in the part. If you give an answer, people come back. If you just heard and you don't have any instrument to help and support people to fix their own problem, you just have 1 time, 2 times, and that's all. But try to fix together the needs and try to find together the solution for the needs, involving also the administrative system and the local world, a community where the people live, is the answer to have the participation of people inside the solution.
Yes.
Not all the time it works, but sometimes it.
Thank you, Isabella.
Welcome.
Yes. Please come in.
Yeah, we are here in Berlin. We are integrated in the coordination system against domestic violence and violence against women. So the institutions and projects know about our service, and they send to us the mandate to us the perpetrators. So they come from the penal justice system, from the family justice, they come from the police, and very important in the last years is the youth services here in Berlin, because we are integrated in the counseling service for the children directly. I'm working with the children directly, and we are very close, work very close together with the service for the victims of domestic violence. So normally the perpetrators are mandated to us. They don't come to us by their own choice. But seldom perhaps they have the conscious that their behavior is not okay. We have posters and leaflets, etc., where they know about our service. And so it's mostly the men come by referral, but some are self-referrals because they think it's not okay, and they have they have some conscious that they have to change their behavior.
Yeah, thank you so much. Moving on, Dr. Imam, is there anything that you'd like to add to this question?
Yes, I can sum up because I have many things to say about that. But just to sum up, official administrative organizations here, nationally or locally, are not really adapted to help migrants, just to register them, which is already a lot, because a few years ago it was worse. But still, there's a lot of work that is done by grassroots organizations. So mouth to mouth, through activities like, as I said, trainings, conviviality, art, performances, and so on and so forth. And also peer-to-peer counseling groups that we have been facilitating with our network here for a few years now. And those groups have been organized by and for LGBT migrants, people who came here a few years ago, who are engaging to help those who came lately. And that's something that is also hard. Like in any grassroots organization, people come for a given service, for help and so on. When they get it, we can understand that that's natural, that's human. They go away. First of all, because they have so many things to deal with, and also they want to move from that context where they suffered so much that is recalling to them all of that. So just a question also I would add that very important, I think. We talk a lot about violence between migrants and everything they've been through in Libya, in the Mediterranean Sea, in Spain, whatever. And that's something very important to deal with, of course, because it's a trauma. It's not going to disappear just like that. We know that as psychologists. But we do not think as much as we should do, I think, about the violence that they also encounter here, administratively, politically, of course, racism and so on, but also people trying to help them, they say, and then in the end, abuse them, involve them into traffics and criminality and so on, or abuse them sexually. So that's something that is very concerning, because we had to deal with a few cases during the last 3 years that we are involved with this network here in Marseille, with people, coming from outside the network and pretending to help, but in the end, taking advantage of those vulnerabilities. So, as I used to say, the issue is intersectional. It's not just because they don't have papers or they don't have accommodation or we lack resources. It's very complex. And I think that one organization could not do everything about that. So I think that when we work on that thematic topics, problematics, we are by nature very modest, because we always understand that we need help, and we just bring a brick to the building of how to help those publics, those patients.
Thank you. You've made some very, very interesting comments and contributions to this question. Can I ask you an additional little question? So, do you find that people who have accessed your services in one way or another spread the word about the good work? So, for example, their own testimony brings other people to your front doors, and that can be seen as a more trusted source, because that could be person to person recommendation.
I can say for us it is a bit sensitive topic, because some clients are ashamed about the fact that they were violent toward their partners. So it is hard for them to spread the word. But I already had a client who told me that one friend of him wanted to come to seek counseling, but he had no problem of violence with his partner. So I told him, no, we are specialized in this other kind of work. It's not possible. But yeah, since it is like more a topic when the men are more ashamed of, and it can be possible if their friend maybe has also a problem not seeing his child or something like that. It can be that he maybe will spread the word, like speaking of this, yeah.
Perhaps we have two parts. The first part is there is a sanction normally by the services, by the police or justice system, but we try to give them some not good advice, but perspective, and they may learn good ways of fathering, of alternative masculinities. So then perhaps if they are may learn something good for their lives, and they can spread this information. Perhaps that's an information we give in journals and newspapers who come to us, and sometimes, or even in the television, and therefore some men are coming to us, perhaps often by some push by their partners.
Yes. Thank you. A further question?
Yeah, for our experience, is something that is really important. It happened a lot of time. So we have people that come back in the association even after years. For example, 2 weeks ago, one woman that was supported by the association 7 years ago, she came back because she was expelled from Canada and come back to Italy directly from Toronto to Florence without nothing with her, and no place where she could stay, no family on the ground. So the first place where she went was our association. So she recognized the place like a safe place for her, and also a place in which she could find some support. And that is something that for us is really, really important, to have the people that come back or that oriented other people to our association and to work with them to fix new problem. And another thing that I think it's really important is to create a different way to work in connection with all the realities that could be useful to find a fix the solution. Like association, we have to have the instrument to fix the problem, and maybe we need also the support of administration, other realities that work in different kind of issue, and only if we work together, strictly connected, we could find a way in which we could give an answer to a very big complexity of situation. As Dr. Mohamed Zahed said before, is something that we need to work with this kind of different interrelationship, because there's a lot of different point of view that we have to fix and put together.
Thank you. Another question I'm going to put to you. What are the challenges in setting up, maintaining collaborations with relevant state agencies, civil society organizations, or community leaders? How can these be overcome? What are the challenges in setting up, maintaining collaborations with relevant state agencies, civil society organizations, or community leaders? How can these be overcome? Let's discuss.
Maybe I can introduce the idea that there's a lot of ignorance, as I said before, in terms of representations and strategy in order to integrate those asylum seekers and refugees within our European societies and diaspora communities. For example, for years, we've been raising awareness through campaigns or by creating our own shelters in different grassroots organizations in Europe that we're in touch with, dedicated or making a priority to welcome LGBT queer refugees, because some of those asylum seekers, refugees, migrants are finding themselves, when they have the chance to finally they get a bed in a shelter, they find themselves, because of that ignorance from the authorities, in the same dorm, for example, with people coming from the same country, the same region. But unfortunately, they have a lot of prejudices against that religious community or that sexual or gender identity orientation. So they end up facing discrimination within their own so-called safe space. So that was also part of the work that we've been doing for a few years to raise the awareness that they have proper identities and personal stories. There's no the refugee, like a stereotype of how you should welcome refugees in every city, in every country. Each city is different, and Marseille is very specific with the 2,600 years of migration opened on the Mediterranean Sea. So it's creating other issues, and that's why we've seen popping up less, collaborations with the authorities during lockdowns, for example, but more grassroots civil initiatives popping up everywhere to help refugees, giving them, a bed or mattress somewhere in private homes, and sharing food and sharing addresses. Like a website have been created by an organization called Welcome Map Marseille, mapping on Google Map all the organizations giving. So I don't know if you have this in Italy and Berlin, but they have mapped all the organizations helping for food, shelter, French classes, free lawyers, and so on and so forth. So it's a lot of effort to make those authorities understand that sometimes they're going the wrong way just because they have a lot of prejudices and stereotypes. And also those quotas, we have a very strong politic of quotas in France, where when they welcome, for example, 30,000 migrants and make of them refugees, they stop, and then even people coming from very, very dangerous contexts, backgrounds, they refuse their case and they say you have to apply next year just because we had enough of migrants for this year. So it's very tiring, and I see, especially in cities, poor cities opened on the Mediterranean Sea like Marseille, they invest grassroots organizations more efforts into grassroots initiatives and peer-to-peer counseling.
Thank you, Doctor. Other contributions?
Yes, I think we have a good positive reactions by the institutions, and so they send us a lot of perpetrators. But it's for a huge city like Berlin, it's not so much, and we have little, very small resources. We are only for men and women here in the team, and that's not enough for this big city here in Berlin, and therefore it has to be developed in the next years, and that's a little bit difficult to say to them. The social workers in the institutions and the courts and so on, they know that's a very good thing to do prevention, but there are not so much resources, especially in the area of dealing with migrants and refugees, and therefore we have to make to make promotion for our work. That's a little bit difficult. And the other point is perhaps the men themselves are not so motivated, and I think that they have see the consequences of the impact of their behavior, and therefore they had some public relations directed at the perpetrators, and there's some motivations by the victims, and they make a call to us, but the men by themselves are not so motivated, and we have to put a lot of energy in this case when they are mandated to this place. And I think there has been some prevention with boys and with the youth, and that the young boys and young men see that's important to use their behavior.
Thank you. Thank you. How do you seek to maintain some of the positive collaborations that are already in existence in your respective areas? How do you maintain them? How do you build them?
If I could say, for us, usually we try to organize an annual meeting with the different realities that we think that could be most important for the relationship that we need to have to support the process of empowerment that we are used to work in. For example, we start to work with different kind of association of women, migrant women in a particular area of our region, and we wrote together and we signed together a reciprocal mutual agreement in which we will organize every year a meeting and to promote the same issue, the values of the association and the collaboration together. This is from the side of the association, the civil society. And the most hard work that we are used to do is with the different kind of administration, and it's a very hard work, even because, as country are mainly every year in an electoral campaign, so it's really hard to fix the relationship that we could have with the local authorities, and also with the regional, and also with the national level. So it's something that we do with a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of work that we have to do to fix all this process, and to be enough on the ground to give our voice inside different level of the administration. It's not only something that is connected with the good administration of the ground, but also with the political change that we have in our country, and also in the local level.
Thank you. There are a few questions. We have a range of questions from the audience. So I'm going to now read them out, share them with you, and let's do our best to provide full answers. A question from Kate. We often work with men who feel torn between their mother and their wife. It's especially an issue where the family has migrated, so there's amplified gaps in terms of culture and finances between generations. Any good tips or tricks for addressing this with perpetrators? I mean, yeah.
Maybe I can talk about. Thank you. Yeah, the theoretical part of that issue, which is common to different topics related to identity dysphoria, as we say. So, two representations of what we should do in order to be empowered and happy and welfare and so on in life. So, I came from Algeria during Civil War 25 years ago, so I had much more time to adapt to the French culture, and also the context was very different 2 decades and a half ago. But now there's so much stress both sides of the Mediterranean Sea to keep our values, our identities authentic, and so on and so forth, that the tension within each individual is even higher and stronger. So you have that idea that in order to be at peace with yourself. In European societies, you have to work and get your own money and be independent. And at the same time, you want to keep your family values in terms of, I don't know, I work a lot about LGBT queer identity. So being straight, making babies, getting married, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, still being related and honor your family, your ancestors, your family values, and so on. So that's something that is very interesting, theoretically, very hard personally, but very interesting because I believe that those hybrid identities coming up from those tensions and the mix of those two cultures, one side and the other of the Mediterranean Sea, will help our societies in order to be more open, more inclusive. But yes, it's going to take time, and we could not force people, or of course not, or pressure them in order to integrate values and behaviors and dynamics that they're still not familiar with, because they're going to be more tension out of that, not more well-being, unfortunately. And that's something that is happening a lot in France. I don't know in other, I imagine it's more or less the same because nationalism is rising everywhere in Europe. But in France, we had a lot of politicians, putting forward the French, so-called French values and identity and history, Christian history, and so on. So those two different kind of cultures have to mix and produce like new hybrid identities in the future. And I believe that's why I believe that migrants and refugees coming so much to our countries nowadays in Europe are a chance, because they are showing us different ways in order to be ourselves and to progress and build more inclusive societies in the future. But yes, there is tensions, and maybe social workers and grassroots leaders, maybe myself also, we had that idea that we have to show them how to do it. Maybe we have to learn from them more than, about our blind, I don't know how to say in English, but blind corners, things that we don't see in our own lives and our own social dynamics. So it's a back and forth process. It's not we have to tell them how to be, because often when I do conferences, public conferences, I have direct, not like today, but direct Q&A. People are asking them, like, almost, I'm sorry for how I say it, but almost how to make out of them good refugees. But it doesn't work like that, fortunately, or hopefully.
And we have this topic a lot, actually, working also with migrant communities that we deal, because we are working with men who are violent against their wives. So there are sometimes conflicts, and the conflicts are usually also because of the extended families. So it is not only like two people, it is the extended families. And sometimes when it is like a German, like a partner is German, it is, or not only that, but sometimes there are problems if one partner wants to send money to his mother or to his sister or sister-in-law, and these problems are new to, different depending on if we're dealing with migrant communities or others. And so the other partner needs also to adapt and see how they can find a solution together to this.
First, I find it very interesting. You're looking for identities, and I think that's also in respect of the gender. We don't say you have to learn some image or something like there's a solution, but there are open masculinities, I think, and that's not mainstream masculinity, good masculinity, but there are a lot of images, and they have to look for themselves. It's a process of searching again, and no solution in this. That we don't give them a solution. They have to learn not to be violent. That's the fundament, the basis. But otherwise, they have to look what's their development.
Thank you. And if I could just add, it's Kate's question for me rings true to my own experiences of working with perpetrators and in perpetrator programs. And the issue of finance comes up very, very, very frequently with the mother back in a country of origin seeking financial support. And that is an expectation that possibly at particular times of the year, possibly different types of cultural events, money is sent home in order to prepare and fund some of those activities. And where you have, for want of another term, potentially a clash of cultures, you know, the new partner might not have the same level of, if you like, financial commitment and responsibility. And some of the advice that I have given, or my staff have given, is around being able to recognise the woman's perspective, because often we know that the woman is the victim, survivor of the violence or the abuse, and as you said, Gerhard, not to respond with violence, not to respond in abusive ways, and to use adaptive coping mechanisms to step away and walk away. But often, sometimes what we also hear from women is that, you know, the man is using a large chunk or significant part of the household finance, the money, and sending it back home, sometimes leaving the family, the immediate family that he's with and in, without. And that's the conversation. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question. Do you think there is a specific issue around violence against migrant women? How do you think it should be addressed? Do you think there is, maybe we'll take this question because there's actually quite a few parts to it. So maybe let's start with, do you think there's a specific issue around violence against migrant women? Is that something we all agree with or not? Isabella?
I think that migrant women has different kind of experience of life in which they could be object of violence. Is the migration that could be expose them to different kind of violence. And I don't think that is something that is concerned is in the intersection between the experience of migration and to be women. That is something that exposes mainly to the violence. But I think that the approach that we tried to have in the last year was to don't be focused just only on the migrant part, but focus on the women part to support the part that could be in sharing with more experience with the rights of other women, not to create a ghetto, but another ghetto inside the ghetto, but an answer that could be shared with other different women and different culture. The relationship between differences is really important to build that, and that kind of new identities that will give the support to find a good kind of different answer. And of course, is a process that needs a lot of time to be done. So we start together, and maybe we will finish together also the process.
Sure. Come in.
Perhaps I think the migrant women are more open. I think we are open for changes. I think if they come to Europe, to Germany, they are like to integrate and to see some success and some hopes for themselves and their children. And I see that the men who are in these relationships are often more traditional, or not so open for changes, and often they there are some struggles about this. But that's not this often the same thing with a mainstream man. They are often not so open for developments in the society. And we have these groups and courses, and in these courses, often half of the men are from different backgrounds, and they are all perpetrators in the first place, and the differences are not so big, I think, and we don't speak so much about the differences between a man who come from Berlin originally, and or come from Africa, because they are men. There's a problem with masculinity, and they have differences, and they want to control their wives. That's a big question. Perhaps there are differences in the control. The migrants, perhaps they have some thinking about what's controlling if their wives are going out in a place and drink coffee and so on. But the base is the ground is the same.
Thank you. Yes.
I would just answer very quickly, yes and no, because we didn't discover gender-based violence and family internal violent dynamics when we had more migrants in Europe. It's a big part of our society: sexism, anti-Semitism, homophobia, transphobia. But when there is misery and acculturation, like people not knowing who they are anymore, as we said before, and so on and so forth, it's more. There's more factors encouraging or determining organically that violence. So in sociology, we give often the example of the hand. When the hand is open and relaxed, you see that it's the palm making the fingers moving. When it's stressed and closed, you just see the fingers. You don't see that the misery is the cause of the violence within families, within gender-based communities, within religious communities, and so on and so forth. So the issue is not religious or refugee status or social background. The problem is misery. When people are at ease personally, and of course you have people having psychological issues and so on and so forth, but it's a tiny minority. Generally, violence and discrimination appears when people are stressed out about survival. It's an animal instinct. It has nothing to do with God or humanity or philosophy. When they starve and they have to choose between a packet of soap or packet of rice, they start, into building those verilist, powerful, almighty masculine identities. So if we really want to, as I said before, deal with those intersectional issues, very complex issues that refugees and migrants are just making it more vivid within our organic social dynamics, we have to deal with the main determining factor, which is misery.
Thank you. That's a very, very, very interesting point you make. And actually, when you think about misery, we know that the coronavirus has brought a lot of pain, misery, and loss, stress, loss of jobs, loss of income, etc. And across the world, we've seen spikes in domestic violence and abuse. Moving on, question from Vahida. Do you think that the country's policies and systems, such as migration laws, add additional barriers to working with perpetrators of domestic violence? Let's discuss. Who would like to respond to Vahida's question?
maybe I can take the example of LGBT queer individuals within their families and communities. For sure, the very short answer, because I mean, I think it's simple to understand, the international tensions and the so-called clash of civilizations and the borders obsession, especially in countries like France or maybe Italy and Greece and Eastern European, especially countries, have raised the violent, homophobic, transphobic, queerphobic dynamics within families and communities. For sure, there's no doubt about that. And we had the same, for example, during the debate concerning same-sex marriages in France in 2012, rise of homophobia and transphobia. So that's something that is parallel within the entire society. That kind of debate raised the attention, the debate, but also the violence against minorities. And the raise also of those debates about we are Europeans, we have to protect ourselves and close the borders and deport all the refugees and the migrants. We have that every day on TV now because the presidential election is coming in 2022 in France. Every day people are putting forward the fact that we have to deport people even like me who came 25 years ago. So you can imagine that people less empowered, less privileged than people like me will take that violence right in their face and have to externalize it in a way or another, either by depression or by violence against others, unfortunately.
Isabella?
I think that there's an institutional kind of violence against migrants without a public discussion about it, how it could be, how the institutional violence, the violence of the states could change also the way in which all the people that live in a particular kind of community understand the meaning of democracy and participation on the social issue. And I don't think it's not only something that you could fix only on the path of barrier for perpetrators of domestic violence. Is something that concerns all the community, and it changes also the point of view of the single state that has on the democracy issue. What happened with refugees is something that concern the base of our communities from Swedish to south of Italy. So it's something that we have to work on for ourselves and to fight against all the kind of violence that we are involved in, like citizens, not only like migrant people. It's something that will be a light for all of us, something that has to speak to us and say, okay, we have to do something more because it's something that concerns our life.
Thank you.
Perhaps it's the insecurity the migrants have, especially the refugees from certain countries. And if they don't have any perspective, they don't try to integrate and don't think about to have a structure in this here in Berlin. I mean, therefore, it's the structure in the family are destroyed, and therefore this legal systems has negative consequences for the families and the men, and also the perpetrators.
What you've contributed brings to mind the notion or the idea of structural racism. What are your views there? Is structural racism something that we consider exists?
Yes.
Of course.
We can see it. Yeah. We can see it also in our work. That's that this can also have a role in, like, for example, I had a client who was violent against his ex-wife like 5 years ago when his baby was 6 months old, and he haven't seen his kid until now, like 5 years, around five years, and he's black from Nigeria. And I can imagine that some things had to do with that. It also led to the fact that he didn't have the help that he could have had, even though he was violent 5 years ago to his ex-wife. He haven't seen since like 4 years and a half. That can also have a role, especially when we see how some organizations sometimes responded to his requests. And so we can only thank these people to associations who help people who are victims of racism in Berlin to see how to solve some kind of situations. And usually these people have a tolerance permit and have some cannot get the help they need in some moments, and that's how they get. And sometimes people assume that they only want to see their child for residence reasons, which is not always the case. That is also some point that comes also like in the judicial system. And there is for sure judicial institutional racism.
Yeah.
Germany as well.
Thank you.
I would give the example of what happened once again in Marseille during lockdowns. They created like an emergency fund for organizations helping with accommodation, sheltering precarious and migrants, and they refused our proposal while they asked us to do it because they said, "Oh, you do a great job," and so on. So we applied, and then they said to me on the phone, of course not by email, but they said to me, "Oh, you have too much migrants and Muslims. So I'm sorry, but it has been refused," just like that. So if that's not institutional racism, maybe we can call it XYZ, but that's obvious. And on a governmental national level, they're still debating about do we have to use the term Islamophobia, because it's maybe making us accomplice of Islamists and terrorists. Do we have to talk about gender? Is it not something coming from USA? Is it something real? So that's the French culture. So denying the problem and dealing with it in the emergency when it starts blowing up in our face. But on the other side, we have the biggest Muslim community in Europe. We have the biggest rate of interfaith and intercultural marriages and so on. So there's so many hopes, but at the same time, the institutions or politicians and civil servants are sometimes pretending too much to be helping, while many of us, especially lately, are just pouring oil to the fire. They're not helping. They're just reinforcing the gaps and discriminations and prejudices.
It's a form of it's like a form of pseudo compliance, a superficial form of commitment or cooperation or engagement, and it's quite disturbing.
Yes, and it's ideological. You feel that they are afraid of losing a part of their culture, while what they do is the best way to kill a given culture. Closing the border, withdrawing within your own patriarchal, nationalistic identities is the best way to make the culture suffocate. And in rather than to deal with the issue in a really humanistic and not superficial, as you said, way, really inclusive and democratic, as Isabella said also.
If I
Thank you.
Just add one thing, is that we start to work with, for example, different lawyers come from different part of the world that work in Italy, that are allowed to work in Italy, to start to make together a reflection on the law that concern migration and how the law that concern migration on Italy has different kind of reflection on the life of migrant people in the country for different kind of aspects. For example, to receive support for the women that comes from gender-based violence, or to support the women that has to renew their permission to stay in Italy using this kind of law. And we would like to make this kind of work exactly to find a way in which we could have the support of the law and the approach of migrant perspective of people that are grow up in our country with a particular kind of experience on this ground. And we would like to do this work in all the different kind of issue. For example, the health of the people, the access of the house is something that is concern exactly the building of the new community in which we will be involved in the future. It's something that we have to start to build now with different kind of perspective to fight the institutional racism and to find the way in which we could build a new language to speak about this kind of issue.
Yes, thank you. What popped into my mind, I don't know if you were present with when we had our presentation from GREVIO. So GREVIO and the wonderful work that they're doing. There's the acronym, the P's, and one of those P's stands for policy and changes at a policy level, which I think is very important. Okay, we're going to take another question from our wonderful audience. And this is a question from Satu. How do you recognize and work with the honor-related violence? And do you have different methods in working with those perpetrators, comparing to working with ordinary DV cases?
Perhaps, we have this this topic in the media some weeks ago, because there was a horrible murder here in Berlin, and there was a discussion if we say the name honor-based violence, honor-based murder, or is it male violence? A special form of male violence, and I think that's something special. But you have to think about that's male control and male hegemonic masculinity is the base of this thinking, and it's not good to make a special spot on this. There are some differences indeed, because often the whole family is involved in special honor-based. Quotation with I don't like this word. There's some differences but I think men have to deal with the control and with the special not only control the profits of being male, and that's I think I don't like it, and we don't like it if we make this special dealing with special treatment of men from this background.
I would add that one of the big issue and misunderstanding, maybe, as I said before, that misery is the problem. It's not, gender orientation or religion, but still, you also have to work on all those factors that are reinforcing the idea that violence is not that bad, and how can I be happy and integrated into a society where I should not be violent to my kids and my wife and my partners and so on. So my expertise is more focused on homophobia, transphobia, rooted within religious texts. And that's also part of the cultural issue and the inner clash that people have to face when they come to European societies within diaspora communities, even if they're born here. So I just have to say that homophobia and killing homosexuals and beating your wife and hating Jews and so on, all of that, none of that, and stoning people, none of that is quoted in the Quran. It's about, interpretations and cultural practices that were in place even in Europe like 500, 1,000 years ago. The last homosexual to have been sodomite, as they say at that time, to have been burned alive in front of the city hall in Paris was in 1750. So it's not that late. It's just before the French Revolution. So when a society is more structures and human rights are seen as something that is going to help the entire society to be more at ease and more empowered and so on, that's something that comes naturally, organically. People will defend those values because they understand that is about everybody's welfare, and giving the right to someone is not going to take anything from you or from your family and your community. But that's also part of the training and education and the raising of consciousness that we have to offer to those migrants, to those people who are coming to us. And unfortunately, once again, if you don't help them learn the language, find proper accommodation, get food for their children, of course, they're not going to get into those kind of educational dynamics because they have too much to do. As I said, choosing between a packet of rice, packet of soap, or human rights, they will choose to eat first and protect their children. So, yeah, that's an intersectional issue once again. So there's no clear black and white answer on those issues, unfortunately.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to move us forward. We have one more question. It's from Paolo. Do you find that it is particularly hard to find a commitment in the meaning and goals of the treatment on DM?
Domestic violence.
DV maybe, with people with different cultural references?
Well, I think that, for example, here in Italy, we just have a particular difficulties just talking about the treatment on perpetrator of domestic violence, not only with different cultural references, even because we could have also different cultural references between the region of our country, from the north to the south, rural area, cities. So it's a very complex question that I think is something that is a really new issue on the ground, and it's something that needs to be work on it and let the people know more about what it concerns at the end. So it's not only concerning the different cultural references between east of Europe, east of the world, south of the world. It's something that concerns starting from the treatment of domestic violence at all.
Okay, as I said before, we have like clients who come because they were mandated, like it is a requirement for them to be able to see their children again, or to move back to their house or to their refugee shelter again. So that's why in first place they come because of this external motivation. And sometimes we managed to keep them here longer than even if they move back to their house. They continue to come to counseling because they see that it helps them into dealing with their conflicts with their partners. Because even if they come back, especially if they come back home after like 6 months and there were violence toward their partners, they need to continue seeking counseling, and they see that it is necessary in some points, but it is not always the case. Sometimes, as soon as they are able again to see their children, the commitment is not always like there.
Is there benefit in having some cultural insight or understanding in regards to the context from where somebody comes?
Yes.
Is that it there?
Yes, me myself, I'm from Morocco, and I spent half of my life in Morocco, so I grew up there. So I'm familiar also with the cultural context, with the religion, so that helps definitely to also bring up examples also from the religion that is sometimes opposite to what some can think, and confront them with different views, and from a woman who sees some things maybe differently, or show them or tell them how I would feel if I was their partners. That can help in this work, I think, yes.
Okay.
I would add just one reference, by Fatima Mernissi from Morocco, a great scholar. A few years ago, she died, peace be upon her. She wrote books, just as Bahia said, rooted, constructing domestic violence from within cultural and religious resources. And that was very helpful because she starts her book by saying that culture is very hard to define. How do you define a given culture? Because it constantly evolves and changes according to migrations, wars, emancipations, and so on. So she goes deep into the so-called Arab Muslim North African culture, try to deconstruct that gender-based violence, saying there's nothing there justifying what you do, what you say. So yes, we have to face the fact that it's violence, and that have to be deconstructed and rejected. So that's also part of the training we should give to those kind of publics.
Yeah, sure.
But the violence is everywhere the same, I would say. So my answer would be also yes and no. There's nothing specific, but the color has to be maybe different, adapted to the individual's backgrounds, of course, and social category and everything else.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. I think we have had some very informative and riveting conversations. I think that by way of looking, or me trying to recount some of the themes that have come up from you all, there's definitely something around resources and limitations on resources. There's definitely something around the need for the perpetrator to have some commitment and motivation to change, and for services to support a perpetrator on that journey. Generally, I myself, if I can talk for myself, have thoroughly enjoyed this panel discussion. I thank you again for your contributions from around Europe, which is wonderful. You probably know I'm from London. But I'm speaking in my best London accent. I'm sure that there's lots of comments and positives coming through the chat as well. But we have used up all of the time, actually. So we have definitely had a very full discussion, and I thank you. I thank you all very much for taking the time to be here. and for bringing and sharing your experiences and the challenges to the work that you all do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.